gap that I see in almost all energy efficiency forums, EE Global, and in this one, where there's a lot of ideas presented, but you know, at the end of the day, while this whole forum is on harnessing innovation, there's many. I think IEA. We got Mel Slade here, by the way. Thanks. She's co-chairing the EE track. I think you had a slide some time ago that said that just applying existing technologies could solve all the needs for the next 20 years, right? And supplying the power for the next 20 years or something along that line. So it's true. And so the purpose of this session is, or its purpose is to try to demonstrate those models that have been proven. We don't have to, the innovation will be in applying these technologies. I think that's the innovation, and that's what we're focused on. And I would have to say, at the expense of not demeaning the presentations here, but due to the selection process, people submit proposals, abstracts, and they get selected, and the 4 that are here are not necessarily proven business models to be demonstrated as best practices, but I'm hoping that this becomes an ongoing session every year that could go into a deep dive that then we could pre-select those that are in fact proven business models to be replicated. So without having said that, you know, we've got some really fun speakers here and some ideas I think that are possibly, if they can be proven, would be very replicable for demonstrating and implementing and scaling up energy efficiency. My first speaker is Gogol Pandian, and he's with the ICF Consulting, and he's got 13 years working with multilateral development banks, and I think the bios on everybody's on the app, so I'm not going to spend too much going through that. But he's got a real interesting presentation that I think could be, I happen to know more about than I want to know about. You know, it's on the rewinding of motors. I tried to set up a motor ESCO last year, and after a year and a half decided not to do it, but kind of unrelated to the topic per se, other than I know more about motors than I want to know. And I think one of the big gaps in the marketplace is, in Asia in particular, when a motor fails, very few of them are replaced with brand new motors. They're rewound. And I know, Melanie, you're working on the MEPs and everything and there's no real MEPs for rewinding motors. And so that's a big gap in the marketplace that I think he has some interesting ideas to address. So without further ado, Google, please.
Honorable people in the dais, Chair Session Chair Tom, my friend Kishore, my previous year ASF co-panelist Lex and distinguished participants. I represent ICF. ICF is one of the largest management consulting firm working provides cutting-edge technology solutions in energy, climate change, aviation, and digital. And we are about 6,500 people across the world, and we do have offices in the US, UK, and in Asia. We have offices in India and Beijing. So today I would like to share an interesting case study. It's primarily in MSMEs, which is called micro, small, and medium scale industries. So I'll just give a brief introduction about MSMEs. So MSMEs are defined in a way, in 2 broad categories, which is manufacturing and services in India. And if you look at it, we have micro, it's about any investment towards plant and machinery, it's about 40K. So they will be calling us micro, and in small it's about 40 to 770K, and medium it's about 770 to 1.5 million. So that applicable to even services too. And is MSME really significant? But when we look at the volume in India, it's very significant. I mean, we talk about 44 million enterprises. This is what so far you have identified. There are much more, exploration still going on. And there are more than, 600 modern clusters. I mean, all the MSME industries have been clubbed together and form a cluster. There are about 600 modern clusters and about 2,000 artisan-based clusters in India. And it contributes almost 8% of the GDP, and there are a lot of numbers around. So important number which I would look at it is the energy consumption. So the energy consumption, as of now, it has been identified as almost 50 million tons of oil equivalent. It's about 7 to 8% of the overall energy consumption in India. But still, we are still exploring, because there are a lot of units are getting added, and a lot of work is being happening through Bureau of Energy Efficiency Services Limited, a lot of multilateral fundings from World Bank to even Asian Development Bank, and then KFW. It's a lot of work which is going on from MSMEs. So is this a nascent market that we're talking about? No, it's not a nascent market. So we are working actually in MSMEs for more than say 10-12 years. A lot of energy mapping has been done by various funding institutions, and a lot of interesting benchmarks have been arrived for different clusters, and the work is actually very high. So what is a dot which is connecting almost all the MSMEs? If you look at it, the one important component which connects most of the MSMEs is motors. So everybody thinks that motors, everyone knows, so what's the big deal about motors? So what I was talking about is about a 44 million MSMEs. Even if you consider 30% of them, they have motors. Okay, so it talks about 12 million MSMEs, right? And even if they have 5 motors with them, so we're talking about 60 million motors. Okay, so 60 million motors, such a large volume. It's just a and then even if it consumes say 5 kilowatt of electricity, and we're talking about multi-megawatt that which is a potential that we have. To give a brief introduction, so motors almost like 45% is the overall consumption, and 70% is being consumed by the industry sector, and there are different categories as well in motors which I do not want to run through, but majority of the MSMEs, if they look at it, they have a capacity between say 0.5 to 375, and on average if you look at it, it's about 50 HP is the capacity. And just to a quick look at the motor value chain before I'm coming to my value proposition. So the way that they actually procure the motor is they just go to non-standard companies, and then they procure the motor, and then they put it into operation. So very simple layout. And what happens based upon a stakeholder consultation survey, within 6 months the motor just goes for repair. And what they do, they just give it to a motor reweighting center. So they just like a repair shop, they just go and repair it, and then the motor comes back to operation within say 2 to 3 hours. Then this cycle actually continues. Many MSME units, they don't have any awareness about like what is the motor quality, motor efficiency, and they also think that okay, fine, this is an additional burden for us. So what they do, they just give it to a repair shop, and without even doing a proper assessment, that repair is being done, and then that has been pushed back to right. We are clearly looking at the non-standard practices being followed for motor reweighting purposes. So due to which what happens is that there is a loss in every time reweighting from almost like 0.5% to 3% of energy consumption. Just imagine we are talking about a 60 million motors. On an average, it goes for a rewinding twice in a year, and we are losing an efficiency of almost say 0.5% to as high as even 3%. So how does this contribute to? So once the motor comes back to the system, it doesn't provide that guaranteed efficiency. It either consumes more electricity or the load of the motor actually comes down. So they have to add more motors, and thereby the electricity consumption of the MSME units are getting increased. And it is putting a lot of dent on their balance sheets. So when we were talking to the industry association, and they were actually telling us that, so Gokul, what is the solution to this? Like what can we do? So then we were thinking that, wouldn't we do something like this? This is like first of its kind for MSME sector in India, because for a lot of large industries, yes, it is available. What we are talking about, a motor testing and a rewinding center. For MSMEs, they don't have any idea. They said, we don't have any idea about how to test the motor, how to rewinding. So is it my own business? Why should we do it? But if they are not interested in taking up that decision to go forward for a testing and rewinding center, then it is going to have a severe impact. So then we were showing them that why you should go for a testing and rewinding center. So testing is basically, everybody knows about motor testing. It's like a set standard procedure that we need to follow, and it's like a breakdown test people will do, and then you will be able to get the results. So what we did was like we actually developed a kind of a small Excel tool, and that tool will tell a number. Okay, that no need to even worry about like what is that number talking about. It's a verified number. So that number can be mapped with certain benchmark and say whether the motor is good to go, or it has to go for rewind, or it has to be replaced. Okay, and the second thing which we were thinking about is the rewindings, because once you tested it, and then owner should know what should I do next, whether should I go for replacement or should go for repair or should I go for some kind of minor modification in the motor. So to do that, we have actually designed a rewinding center based upon the existing practices. So just to throw some light on it, because there are a lot of text around it which I do not want to run through. If you look at it like how they open the motor, so how do a preliminary inspection. So what they do, if all those local rewinding centers, they don't even worry about the preliminary inspection. They think that the motor comes to them, which effectively means that this motor coil has already burnt out. Okay, that's a decision that they make, but that is not the case. We said there is a set procedure that you need to follow to go for a preliminary inspection even. And the next one, dismantling and casing of the motor. So when the motor comes in, so what they do, they just open the motor like breaking a coconut, that they just open the motor and then motor comes out, But that's not the procedure. That is again a set procedure. We have actually given them the training. And the third one is removal of the old windings and cleaning. We need to really understand whether the motor has to go for rewinding or not. So what kind of a material which has already been employed, what is the insulation pattern of the motor, and what is your gap between the stator and rotor, that all has to be properly assessed. Then we come to a conclusion of whether it has to be rewound or not. So then comes your actual rewinding. So it has procedures, like they can actually follow the electromechanical IEC procedures, and which talks about clearly how a motor has to rewind, what kind of width of the wire and thickness of the wire, copper wire that you're talking about, and what is the methodology that you have to deploy, and what type of varnishing and assembling and final testing that has to be done. So we prepared the entire knowledge paper, and then it's not a knowledge paper, I would say it's like a demo case that we have prepared, and that project has been given to the SME Association. Then the SME Association was pretty happy. Okay, fine. Now we have a testing center which can actually test the motor. Then we have a rewinding center. If there are any issues, then it can be rewound. So what next? The next one which we are going to conceptualize was like put up an energy efficient shop, where you will get all the energy efficient motors. So we have visualized in a way that when an MSME actually walks into this center with his old motor, what he can get? He can get either he can go for a replacement, or he can get the motor rewound, extend its lifetime, or he can also come out with a new motor. So what is the business case in this? So when we wanted to set up a center, and it was actually partially funded by even World Bank for the testing center, and the other project was actually funded by Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. So what about the funding of the rewinding center? So the MSME Association has approached one of the state government, and the state government has actually liked the idea, and they said, this particular concept is very good, and they're ready to even fund the project, but they were looking at what is the payback, how this model is going to work. So what we have presented to them was like, it is actually going to be a volume game, because we need to make sure that the quality of the rewinding should not be compromised. At the same time, the MSME should not cost as high as an authorized rewinding center in the particular locality, because authorized rewinding centers obviously charges are so high, and they rewind those high and large motors. Whereas in this case, it's all going to be very small motors, about 30 kilowatt or 25 kilowatt. So in that case, the cost also should not be high. At the same time, it should be affordable for the MSMEs. So we have actually developed a business model in such a way that what should be the minimum volume that MSME should look for. So considering the cluster volume is so high, and then the number of motors comes to those local rewinders are very high, and it's absolutely no problem for these rewinding centers should operate without any problems in terms of finance. And then the government has actually approved this model, and it's still with the government for final approvals. Once it is approved, then this model will be put onto place. And we saw that, we just did a quick assessment, while we did a detailed assessment as well, but to just show it here, our recommendations were final summarized if I want to do it. There are some barriers which we are able to remove, like one, of course, is lack of standards and guidelines, which still it's not there, and even internationally also very few standards which are available. And there's a lack of awareness. Because of testing center, we were able to remove that. And then time constraints for the motors. Yes, of course, now because of new, better rewinding practices, there is going to be a time constraint, which has actually been accepted by even IMSME. IMSME is the association here, they have accepted it. And of course, there are technological constraints. Through our international research, we were able to actually come to a conclusion, okay, these are the best practices that you should follow so that the motor will be very efficient. And to set up a center, we were thinking, thinking of almost like for a 30 kilowatt, up to 30 kilowatt, if you have to set up the center, it's going to cost somewhere around, say, $200,000 with 1 year of operation as well, inclusive in that. And the center, if they operate it as efficient as possible, they will be able to get even their revenue back in, say, 27 months. It's less than 2 years. Okay, so this is the case study which I would like to share, and thank you so much, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, Tom. Hope I'm on time.
No, very good. Thank you. We increased the time for everyone to 15 minutes, and he beat his 15 minutes. So that was a challenge. He had 18 slides, so that was very well done. So next we're going to have Kishore Kumar, and he's going to talk about MEPs in India and how to squeeze out more savings and try to do some new things. So we're anxious to hear what you've got.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I would like to thank SF and ADB for inviting me here for the event. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Tom for giving an introduction about me. So, because of the time constraint, I'll quickly jump into my presentation. Today, I'm going to say about the roadmap for transforming India energy efficiency scenarios through labeling program for appliances. And my presentation has 3 components, basically. The first is about the Indian electricity consumption and generation patterns. And the next is about the labeling program, how it has been initiated and what is the achievements. And thirdly, about my suggestions or the innovative approach that we are trying to adopt through a labeling program. If you see this slide, this is the Indian electricity generation capacity since 2007 till 2017. And if you see in 2007, it's like total 670 billion units was generated. And mostly that generation is coming from the thermal power plants. It's like more than 79%. And like renewables, hardly 1%. And if you see currently, that is in 2016, though the generation level has increased, it's like 236 billion units in 2017, but the share of thermal power plant is remained the same. It's like 80%. And luckily, or the policies which we adopted in India, the renewable share has increased to 7%. So this is a good move towards, for renewable side at an Indian level. And if you see, the share of thermal power plant installation has been consistent since 2007 to 2007. So mostly we are still dependent on the thermal power plants. And this slide says about the Indian electricity consumption at the utility sites. So in the year 2007, there was total 525 billion units consumption. And if you break that into a sector-wise, it's like totally 46% is for the industrial side and 21% for the domestic, and agriculture 19, and 2% for the traction, etc. And if you see currently in 2017, the total consumption is like 1,066 billion units, and the share of industrial has been reduced a bit. It's like they came to 40%. But in case of the domestic sector, the share has been increased to 24% from 21 in 2007. So here I want to stress that the consumption or the electricity requirement in the domestic sector is keep on growing gradually, and if you see the year-on-year average growth rate, it's approximately 8% in the residential sector. And here I just trying to show the requirement of electricity in domestic sector in year 2016 and year 2020-22. And this projection is coming from the Indian Central Electricity Authority, which are like power generation, government power generation in our country, and they projected saying it that by 2022, we may require 1,566 billion units of electricity. And of that, 30% is going for the domestic side. And if you see for the industrial side, the share has gone to 30%. So there's a huge demand or the requirement for the domestic side through this graph I'm trying to highlight. And now I'm coming to the second component of my presentation. It is about the labeling program for the appliances or the residential side. So the standard labeling program, it's before launching it, actually there is an organization called Bureau of Energy Efficiency. It's a government organization which is a nodal energy agency, and it has been established in 2002 by Energy Conservation Act, and it's under the Ministry of Power. And the standard labeling program for appliances, it's got launched in 2006 by a Honorable Minister of Power. And if you see the objectives of a labeling program, it's very simple. We say the energy consumption at the end use, we want to reduce it. And we want to aware the consumer about the appliances performance through the labels, like which is the efficient one. And annually, we want to see what is the energy savings has been coming out from through the labeling or the efficiency schemes. And if you see the outcome of all these things, at the end, you may have the efficient product and even the good quality appliances as well. So this is our overall objective of this scheme. And if you see a sample label has been given here. Yeah. Sorry. There's some issue with the screen. Yeah, sorry. This is a label that usually manufacturer affix on the appliances, and when a consumer go to purchase an appliance at the retailer stores, he can see that label and he can make an assessment that the appliance which he wants to purchase, how efficient it is. Is it a 5-star or the 1-star? It's like a matrix that we gave it. The 5-star stands for the high star rating and 1-star stands for the lowest star rating. And apart from that, we even given other additional details like what is the star rating parameter. In this case, you can see ISER, which is Indian Seasonal Energy Efficiency Ratio. And there is a label period, which is for the regulations or the performance levels validity period. And the other manufacturer details like what's a model number, who are the manufacturer, when it has been manufactured, and what is the type of technology, what is the electricity consumption, etc. all been given here. If you see the next slide, and this is like, it's one of my interest slide. It has four basic things. First is about the mandatory appliances. Second is about the voluntary appliances. And the graph says about the how many are mandatory and voluntary, and the other says about the how many are endorsed and comparative label. If you see the first table, there are totally 10 appliances which are mandatory right now. And if you see in the first one, which is like frost-free refrigerator, it got launched in 2006, and it got mandated in 2009. And it's in 2012, 14, and 16, it got upgraded by every 20%. So this is something which we do regularly based on the market transformation of the appliances. And in case of the voluntary as well, you can see the rest 11 appliances, and we are trying to move them towards the mandatory. Maybe in next couple of them, we have to see the assessment of this, performance levels in the market, and then we will do it. And as I told you already, there are total 10 mandatory and 11 voluntary, and there are 19 comparative labels. That is, out of this 21, 19 are comparative, which is like star levels, 1 star to 5 star, and the rest 2 are the endorsement. In the case of endorsement, the manufacturer has to comply only the specific value, specific performance level, rather than competing with other star levels. So that's the difference between the endorsement and the comparative. And if we move on to the next slide, yes, this is the performance levels which I was talking about. We got upgraded, or we upgraded the appliances levels. If you see in case of the frost-free refrigerator, since it's launched in 2006 to 2018, total 12 years, it got upgraded by 60%. So it's like in a span of 12 years, we upgraded by 60%. That is a minimum. The 1 star has been upgraded to 60, and the TFL less than 10, and direct cool refrigerator totally 50% approximately, and frost-free refrigerator more than 35%. And transformers more than 30%, and the color television and the water heater, it's like 40%. So this is like mandatory appliances, because in the mandatory we have a control on the developing the performance standards and ratcheting up of the standards. So we usually do the ratcheting up in the mandatory appliances. And this is like a key indicators or the achievements of the standard labeling program. If you see, as I said, it's already launched in 2006, and if you see in 2010, what are the achievements, and if you see 2016, what are they right now? So totally, from launch till date, there were 1,006 million products were registered with the labeling program, and in 2010 it's like hardly 144 million. And the annual registration or the products are like 25 million in 2010, and 2016 it's like 126 million. And total number of models registered in 2010 it's like 8,500, and in 2016 it's 14,000 plus. So in that 2010 there were only 10 appliances, but in 2016 it's total 21 appliances which were giving a star labeling. And if you see the manufacturers numbers also are very less at the time of 2010, it's like hardly 400 plus, but now there are nearly 1,000 manufacturers. And the interesting part is that the energy savings which you are talking about. The last line it says, in 2010 there were totally 15 billion units were saved through the scheme, but in 2016 197 billion units were saved because of the 21 appliances performance levels. And if we want to see what are the share of, sorry, yeah. So if you see the energy saving share, the most of the contribution is done by the direct cool refrigerators, totally 31%, and next the air conditioner 26%, and the frost free refrigerator 18%, followed by the agriculture pumps, it's like 10%. So you can say the refrigerator has been a major contribution of energy saving in our scheme. And I just came to the third component of my presentation. So if we see the energy savings year on year, the average growth rate, it's very interesting. It's like 21% we got. And if we want to see what could be the next 5 years energy saving, they have done a 12% average growth rate assumption, and they have projected the energy savings. And it shows that by end of 2021, or the financial year, it could save to 1.5 billion units of electricity through this scheme. So that's an approach that the BE has adopted, and they're planning to do it. And in my suggestions or my policy innovation or the ideas that I'm trying to give them is, if you see currently the policies of a few of the appliances are going to expire, and they are about to be revised or have to upgrade in the next year, that is from 2019 and all. So I was given an idea to them, like what could be the level of performance that could upgrade it, or we could improve it. So like frost-free refrigerator, direct cool refrigerator and electrical geyser, we told them to upgrade it by 1 star, which is 20% from 2019. And ceiling fan and the agriculture pumps, currently they're in a voluntary phase. And if you see the market penetration of the ceiling fan is hardly 10%, and the agriculture pumps is hardly 20%. So if you make it mandatory, then the market share or the more number of models will coming into the labeling program that will give a good boost for the energy savings or the potential. And the room air conditioner policies are going to expire by December 2019. So we suggest them to upgrade by 1 star. And at the same time, LEDs, we told them to upgrade by 1 star. So if you see in the percentage of upgradation, as I told you, in case of frost-free refrigerator, it's like 1%, 1 star, it's like going to be a 20% upgradation. And direct cool refrigerator, 1 star upgradation, it's going to be a 20%. And electric geyser, 9%. Pumps and ceiling fan, suggesting to make it mandatory from 2019 and upgrade by 2 stars. So that's how the 10% in pumps and 13% in the ceiling fan. And interestingly, for the regulations of color television, they are already in place. So we are not suggesting any upgradation policy for it. And in case of the room air conditioner LED, as I told already, it's like 2 star upgradation and 1 star upgradation could increase the performance level or the efficiency level by 13% and the 16%. So taking into all these performance levels and the annual sales data of these appliances and the year-on-year growth rate, considering the year-on growth rate, the energy savings could be 158 billion units if we adopt this approach by end of 21-22. So additionally, the B has to even focus regularly on the monitoring verification of the schemes and the market transformations of the appliances and other government policies which are going to affect the labeling program. And even the consumer awareness has to be increased day to day so that this savings and this program could be achieved better. So that's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kishore. We're going to go next and have Alex Alablaza talk. Many of you know him. He's a fixture around here at ADB and within the ASEF event. He's been spending a lot of time developing the energy efficiency market in the Philippines. Has 34 years working in financing and scaling up and removing barriers. So he's one of the EE champions that I'm proud to say we have here. A lot of the focus historically has been on renewables, and there's a couple of us that have been standing strong with the EE, and now it seems to be taking hold. So Alex, he's going to talk about a new law you're proposing, and it's in its way in the Philippines, and the tax incentives, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Great, look forward to it.
Thanks, Tom. Well, it's first two presentations we were talking about motor technologies, and the second we were talking about transforming the market through accelerated standards and labeling. Now I'm going to talk about policy, how it works with money, and how policy and money can transform the energy efficiency market. And maybe there are some lessons from the Philippine experience that can be replicated across. I've worked in at least 12 Asian markets, developing Asian markets, and maybe we could pick up some lessons and replicate it elsewhere. I can't keep the excitement that for those who are following, most of you are following the energy efficiency and ESCO markets. We made history here in ASEF yesterday. ESCO associations of 5 countries, China, Japan, Philippines, Singapore, and Taiwan, have decided to come together and perpetuate a regional platform by forming the first ever Asia-Pacific ESCO Industry Alliance. And Philippines and China were tasked to co-chair this alliance through the first 2 years. So it's a big moment in Asia-Pacific energy efficiency history. So back to my presentation. I've said this again and again, and I'll continue to advocate this, that at some point in time, and I'd like to say 5 to 10 years in the case of the Philippines, we'd like integrated resource planning. We'd like demand and supply side. And I like using this ACEEE pie chart where it says that energy efficiency is the 3rd largest resource in the United States energy mix, next to natural gas and coal. And it is estimated by ACEEE that by 2030, energy efficiency would be the #1 resource in the energy mix, outpacing those of natural gas and coal. So it's something that, energy efficiency in most markets is still siloed. Here we have an energy plan, right, with generation and transmission distribution. On the other side, we have the demand side that's still locked in its own silo. The Philippines has been ranked 50th in the World Bank's regulatory indicators for sustainable energy. And it was one of the first few countries with its own energy conservation law in the Southeast Asian region. But sadly, it is probably a laggard right now. And things are changing very quickly because after a quarter century of pushing a new law, it's finally going to happen. And this is what my presentation this morning is all about. It's driven by many things. First, the first time in history that the Philippine government, through the Department of Energy, has approved an energy efficiency conservation roadmap. And the timelines has just been extended from 2030, now it's 2040. What is it saying? That cutting across all sectors, I don't expect you to read most of the fine print and numbers in my deck. That's meant for reading after, well, once it's uploaded into the website. What it is saying is that by 2040, the annual savings should have reached 10,000 kilotons of oil equivalent. So there's a number, right? And there are other drivers. In ASEAN, the Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation says that there should be 20% energy intensity reduction by 2020. The 21 economies of APEC are committed towards a 45% energy intensity reduction by 2035. And the Philippine government, just like most Paris signatories, is reviewing the 70% GHG emission reduction targets by for 2030. So this is under review whether they could commit this as their NDC or nationally determined contributions. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see that PE2, the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance, has done the economic math. To reach government's target, we need to shave off 182 million tons of oil equivalent across sectors. That will result in over $726 billion in avoided energy purchases, traditional energy purchases from the grid and off-grid. And the savings will benefit the agricultural, forestry, and fisheries, which is called AFF in this chart, the commercial, the residential, the transport, and industrial sectors. 1.7 gigatons is not a small figure. And we estimate that by 2030, 30 to 35% of the supposed 70% emission reduction nationally determined contribution could be achieved through energy efficiency. And I'm just talking about demand-side energy efficiency. So if a third of the country's Paris climate obligations can be delivered by energy efficiency, then we need legislation, we need capital flows to this kind of asset class. Now what it's also saying is that 46,000 megawatts of deferred infrastructure upgrades in all generation, transmission, and distribution could be deferred or delayed by attaining the roadmap targets. Again, don't read the small print, just read the headlines. The left-hand side says it's not coming for free. We need to mobilize $243 billion across end-use sectors to make this happen. And that is not a small figure either. It's like 3 times the national budget of government in the Philippines. And one thing that I'll spend a little bit more time is the bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen. It's third-party capital flows. The blue bars at the bottom of the Gantt chart refer to the energy efficiency potential through business as usual, self-finance, debt finance, and lease finance. Okay? So when a government buys LED lights and distributes, when a large factory buys new motors, that's self-financed. Or when it borrows from a bank, that's debt finance. But what we're saying in PE2 is that it's the red area that's going to be through third-party capital flows. So what are these? When I install my chillers, I own a mall, I install chillers in my own mall, that's self-finance. But if I install it in Tom's shopping mall, that's third-party capital flow. And that happens through ESCO performance contracting, that happens through public-private partnerships, that happens through equity structures and equity vehicles. That has not had the chance to be fully deployed and fully demonstrated in most of developing Asia. So it's third-party capital flows that will have to be incentivized by legislation to make that red area, which is roughly 2/3, happen and be realized, and therefore help the country achieve the 2040 targets. So we we in the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance, and I'm happy that my Vice President for External Affairs is sitting in the back of the room. Ruth, say hi to everyone. Hi. So we gathered 45 companies, and more than half of them are accredited energy service companies. So we were a pure ESCO club in the first 11 years under the guidance of the government, but we pulled away from that and broadened the membership to include not only ESCOs, but also EE solutions providers. We have 2 law firms. We have other professional companies, contractor service. We have a third category for financial institutions, financial services, investors, equity providers, guarantee funds. We have a fourth category for nonprofits, industry chambers, professional societies, academia, and research. And the last category would be large business, which have mainstream energy efficiency in its core operations. We are adopting a 4-point approach: establish alliance, push the law, enforce bridge policies, and establish a more durable public-private collaborative council. Again, don't read the fine print. All the left-hand side of the screen is saying it's been through a 25-year history of pushing this in the halls of Congress. And only 2-3 months ago, we finally hit the 4th base. We got the Philippine Senate to approve the bill on 3rd and final reading, and it's down hitting plenary in the House of Representatives very, very soon. What's just the small delay we're encountering is the government, the Philippine government, just like the US government, is going through a major tax reform which is influencing the incentives that were designed for energy efficiency. Now what the right-hand side of the screen is saying, everyone consuming 1.8 terajoules or 500,000 kilowatt hours has obligations under the law. And you don't need to read the rest because that's a standard menu of what an energy efficiency law. But it doesn't create a super agency like that of Vietnam or India. It doesn't create a revolving fund like that of Thailand. So it's sort of light touch. One thing that is very, very, very powerful is this. When we tell government, you give us incentives, every 1 peso, every $1 that you give us in what you call foregone revenues is actually foregone. Because it will, if energy savings of enterprises, and a large portion of that will contribute to taxable income, it will increase tax base and therefore increase tax revenue. So if 1 peso will flow back to not only the economy, but will flow back to the national treasury as 2 pesos and 31 centavos. So there's a 230% recovery, and it'll flow back. There's an interesting IRR for government if they invest every $1 in incentives to incentivize this. And that would increase third-party investments from 6% to almost 15% on an after-tax basis. Key lessons. First, you need strong private sector and civil society voice, a strong force to work with government, and government cannot do it alone, and neither could private sector do it alone. Second, legislation will create the demand and enable incentives, and that incentives can be shown as not a threat, not a leak to the economy, but actually as a revenue generator for government. And what we have ahead is PE2 is trying to look at creating more dedicated energy efficiency equity vehicles. If 2/3 of the money won't be self-financed, debt-financed, we need more equity channels in the market. And I believe that is true for the rest of developing Asia. We need performance and credit guarantee facilities to support the ESCO industry. We need PPP, fund structures, and super ESCO vehicles where applicable for bundled energy efficiency in the public sector. We need training centers because human resources will have to catch up. If you want to grow the ESCO industry with the same velocity as the Chinese market, then you need human resources to catch up. We need to see how energy efficiency relates with smart grid and microgrid in commercial and industrial end-use sectors. And lastly, we need new business models. If ESCO performance contracting can start to work in the private sector, let's make it work in the government sector. But more interestingly, we are willing to explore how ESCO performance contracting can be done on the supply side of the energy performance of most energy markets. For example, what if you entered into, if you were an ESCO, what if you entered into a performance contract with a transmission company and you restring the conductors and be compensated on the basis of transmission's loss reduction? Same is true, systems loss reduction for distribution utility done on a performance contracting basis, or even generation efficiency for IPPs or power producers. So that's my last slide. I'll be happy to answer your questions during the Q&A at the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. So now our last presentation is from Anthony Watanabe, sorry about that, and he's addressing an area that everybody's attempted to address for many years, starting back, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, Walmart's attempts to do this for the supply chain, trying to force the efficiency on the supply chain. I was active in that, and it's a big challenge, but a big opportunity. And you've got some real nice, interesting experiences you're going to share with us.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everybody. Just before I begin, just take a look at the person beside you and look at how they're dressed. Just take a quick moment. And unfortunately, as I was thinking of this earlier, I thought, oh, there's a lot of men in dark suits and so on. Well, that's... of course, the clothes we're wearing has a significant environmental footprint. We're aware of that. And what I'm seeing now is that, as I think of my fellow panelists, this is a great final situation for my talk, because it kind of brings some of the things together in a specific use case, which is the garment sector. And in the absence of some of the enlightened policy, I think, that Alex described, what are some of the other pressures that are moving some of the suppliers in this space to look at improved environmental performance, starting with energy efficiency? And that's kind of the focus I want to address today. A little bit about my company. I'm based in Bangkok, Thailand. We have two sections. One is kind of technology provision, clean technologies in air, energy, and water. I'm going to focus rather on the second area, which is really like resource efficiency in the industrial sector here in Southeast Asia. So what are some of these global drivers of this environmental performance? Well, the big brands are setting up ambitious, ever more ambitious sustainability strategies based on some of these things, of course, Paris and the Sustainable Development Goals. A number of companies have committed to the RE100, so to be supplied exclusively 100% by renewable energy by 2030. And then in the garment and the textile space, there is the Transparency Index, which is a kind of non-voluntary, so they just take it upon themselves to look at the levels of disclosure from different manufacturers, suppliers, where they're located, which numbers, materials use, and so on. If we look at just two of the countries where we've done some work, from the garment space, the very significant economic impacts. In Vietnam, for example, over 6,000 factories that are set up. It's the largest sector in the country today by far. About 30 billion in exports, and about a total energy spend of 3 billion per year. So quite significant. In Cambodia, much smaller market, yet still over 6 billion in exports. In this market where, of course, electricity tariffs are much higher than in Vietnam, the energy costs account for about 16% of total production in the garment space. These are just some of the brands that are active in both countries, and there are challenges. Cambodia recently raised the minimum wage in January. Other markets in the region, like Myanmar, have clearly opened up. So this kind of energy efficiency and broader resource efficiency is a new, it was always a competitive lever, but it's been given, I think, renewed strength and renewed attention now. This is a little bit of the context. What I've done is, just to make it a little bit real, is without naming them, I've taken 3 multinational brands that are active in Southeast Asia, producing here. Some of them as much as 80 to 90% of their global production comes from this region. And just across those 3 brands, I've started to quantify some of the impacts. So we're talking about over 1 million employees. The average consumption of one of their factories is almost 16 gigawatt hours per year. And if we take a reasonable kind of reduction target around 15%, then we're looking at almost 2.5 gigawatt hours. If you take that one number, 2.5 gigawatt hours, across the 400 factories of these 3 brands in Southeast Asia, we see that there is a very, very significant potential. So that's kind of the backdrop, I think, to the opportunity at hand, specifically around efficiency. If we add to this rooftop solar, for example, or improved biomass, and then anything around water treatment or pre-treatment before discharge, we have a very significant base, I think, for environmental innovation. You're right, Tom. It's been tried, and I think, you know, what I'm going to show here is not necessarily methodologies that are yet replicable and proven and have been quantified, but I think learning from the mistakes of the past and even some of our own, I think, mistakes and let's call them not incompetencies, but not quite hitting the mark as to what the supply chain needs, we have kind of a what next thinking. So we've worked in about 14 factories across a few of the countries in the region. So it's not a huge sample just yet, but in addition to these, in discussions with a whole host of others, the challenges are nearly universal across the supply chain. And some of them relate to some of the things we've heard before. First of all, around building capacity, internal capacity of the staff. They certainly understand how to set up a factory and produce shoes or produce garments on time to a high degree of quality and in a very efficient way. But when it comes to environmental performance, often there is just not the local expertise to do that. There's been a lot of attempt from the brands and the suppliers themselves around training, and unfortunately either the training is too light and misses the mark, or if it is on point, and at a certain point the staff turnover comes into play and that knowledge kind of leaves through the front door. So that's one huge area. Of course, energy management systems. We've seen very, very few rigorous and robust energy management systems in place. And by this I mean, of course, technology, but also just the procedures, the SOPs for collecting and reporting data, and then not just reporting it, but analyzing the data and making it actionable and taking strategic decisions based on that data. There's a whole range of processes and procedures, many of which fall short of what I would call rigorous and consistent. And so then you get kind of a haphazard lay of the land, as it were, with a team that's not necessarily competent to analyze that data and make deductions from that and then take the appropriate action. So this is, again, some of the challenge in the sector. And then management leadership. I think with the kind of policy that Alex laid out, that would certainly get the attention of management that's looking at the financial bottom line, of course, because of the incentives. But in the absence of that, it's important that management understand the payback periods, the mid and longer term benefits of the kind of investment that's required. I mean, it could be simple things like a lot of the factories, they are themselves are part of multinationals, so they're operating in 4 or 5 countries, and their head office is somewhere here in the broader APAC region. And if it comes to, say, sewing machines or auto cutting machines or different types of equipment, lighting systems, they sometimes mandate from head office. So the local factory actually has no say in choosing supplier A or supplier B, one of which might have a better energy performance than another. And so in fact, what happens is at a factory level, they're often inheriting equipment that maybe has been verified by management from a cost perspective, from a warranty perspective, but not from an energy performance. And so they could be, and I've seen this, they've inherited, in fact, a disadvantage from an energy performance standpoint. And at the same time, their customer, the brand, is putting increasing pressure on improving that environmental performance. So this all has to work as a system. These things have to function together. And currently, it's more the exception than the rule. So I wouldn't say this is yet a set of best practices, but these are definitely some guiding principles that I think are consistent, by and large consistent across the different suppliers of garment products in Southeast Asia. So we need to drive consistent performance despite this kind of revolving staff turnover and varying levels of competency. And as part of any engagement process, staff capacity needs to be built up so that they can participate in the process meaningfully. There's going to be a mix of local, because we need the cultural and linguistic support for sure, but also some international best practices, whether it's technologies or fiscal management or broader energy management systems to deliver really the long-term results. A lot of the changes on the front end can be small, can be kind of, decentralized or disaggregated, but really the big wins come when we move towards, energy efficiency performance contracts, energy efficiency agreements, renewable energy, PPAs, and so on. And I should mention that from the groups we worked with, we've now had follow-on with about 5 of them, and in 3 countries are in direct discussions around energy management systems, so full-on kind of ESCO implementation, and also rooftop solar. So that's great to see that some of them are moving to that stage, and it's been a significant, I would say, educational process to get into the technical and the commercial details of those arrangements, but I think that's what's needed, and some of this data consistency will prepare for that next all-important implementation stage. And any solution needs to be affordable for the suppliers. They are, in some respects, getting challenged, I won't say squeezed, but challenged by the brands on a number of levels, and so it needs to be accessible financially for them, and that barrier needs to be low so that they see the value quickly. And all of this can lead to that consistent and, as I say, really actionable data collection, analysis, and reporting. So not yet a set of best practices, Tom, but I would say some important guiding principles that we've extracted from our work to date and our discussions with brands and factories across the region. And there's clearly an appetite to move to some of these things. And my last slide is, a lot of the clean tech solutions that I sell into Southeast Asia are from Canada, where I hail from. And for this work with the garment sector, we've latched onto this software tool called RedScreen, which was developed a long time ago by the Government of Canada. It now has almost 600,000 users. It's been translated into 36 languages. I won't tell you how inexpensive it is at the microphone. I'll tell you one-on-one for sure, but it's very, very affordable, very usable, feasibility analysis. So it is one of the tools that we're incorporating and also passing on to the suppliers to really start to drive that consistency in the data and that common language and reduce that barrier, both from a cost and a technical perspective. So I see significant opportunity to drive energy efficiency in just this one sector, in just this one region, for some of the reasons that I've described. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share a very brief experience I had when working with Walmart in their attempts to do this maybe 10 years ago. They tried to force energy efficiency onto their supply chain in China and several other areas. And at the end of the day, it did not work out. And I think the primary reason was they really didn't have the leverage over the suppliers they thought they had. When we helped them try to go to some of the facilities, and they were not very cooperative, and their general attitude was these suppliers, while Walmart said they thought they had the ultimate hammer and telling them, if you don't do this, we're going to change suppliers. Many of the main suppliers says, we don't need Walmart. They're not going to tell us what to do. They're already putting tons of pressure on us to give them more product at a lower price. That's our core business, and retain quality. Now they're going to sit here and tell us to make investments in energy efficiency? I don't think so. Not today. Not today. And, we were trying to come up with a scheme, and what we thought was the ultimate solution. If they wanted to be successful, we thought what they could do, because one of the barriers was capital. In order to do the energy efficiency, these suppliers were going to have to provide capital. And I thought the ultimate solution was, we recommended it, but it never went through, was that Walmart was in the perfect position, because we could provide the funding, but we couldn't collateralize it. We couldn't go around and get collateral from all these small suppliers. But the one who had was in the ultimate position was Walmart. They're paying all these suppliers, and they were a perfect guarantor of payment on the energy savings. But they were unwilling to make that step. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be challenging. Well, your ideas are really perfect in terms of what's needed to be done to get them to do it by themselves. I think the challenge is going to be, if you want to scale it up, having some of these global players kind of be able to stand behind and back up, their mandates to try to get them to do this. I think that was a challenge. So having said that, we've had these 4 areas are fairly significant energy efficiency opportunity areas. Motors, 60% of the industrial electrical consumption is from motors. Big opportunity, big gap on the rewinding piece. I think it's very interesting to hear, and of course I'm going to ask each of you a specific question in a minute. But the appliances, I mean, that's been around for a while, and it's at 24%. Mel, what's the overall global percentage of appliance consumption globally? It's in the 20% range, isn't it? Easy. Yeah, so, and you're seeing huge gains in efficiency, big opportunity. On the policy side, the tax incentives, I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about that on a private conversation with Alex, about exactly which tax incentives are being proposed. And, of course, we're interested in hearing the results on that. I'm not sure if anybody else, maybe in the Q&A, if anybody has any experience on tax incentives and the results that have been achieved from that. That would be real interesting to hear in the comments coming after. And then, of course, I already commented about the supply chain. That's a great opportunity, I think. And what Anthony's doing is doing it kind of like how do they do it internally themselves to want to do this? And I think what could be real interesting is somebody come up with a model that could have the global players drive this down. To scale it up, I think, would be one of the solutions, in addition to what Anthony's provided. So I have one question for each of my presenters here. I was going to say something else, but I got to remember I'm not in Texas, right? Right. So I have to tone it down a little bit. So I'd like for each of you to tell me, what do you think the ultimate best practice is in what you're doing now that could be replicated? What is that best practice? What is it could be done? And then I'd like for you to talk just briefly, how easily could that be replicated in your opinion? Okay, so that's the question. So I'm going to start in order of presentation. You first, Gogo. So the first question is, what is the ultimate best practice in what you're doing that you think could be replicated, and how easily could it be replicated, do you think? Or what are major barriers to be considered in it being replicated?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. If you look at from the motor perspective, as you mentioned, it's there everywhere. Two things which we have seen when we look at from the MSME perspective. One, we look from the perspective of the industry owners. Other one that we look from the perspective of the local revendors. So these are the two people, right? The motor is going to go from, say, point A to point B or point B to point A. So from industry owner side, awareness is one of the key issues that we have seen. One, they have to understand how a motor performs, what is the implication. They look at only from the electricity bill perspective. So how that number pops up is the awareness that needs to be created. And then the second one, from the revendors perspective, they wanted to have a quick turnaround time. So they don't have, all the time to, actually rewind it and then, give some best practices. So we were actually trying to figure out, like, what is the optimum way to bring these people to point B to save here. At the same time, from revendors, they can actually move from here. Then we actually created this particular model, and then we have actually trying to establish with the SME association, and the association has actually welcomed it. They have actually called up the stakeholders from both the industry owners and from the revendors, and revendors were thinking initially that it's something like a business lost for them, but that's not the case. Actually, their capacity is getting increased. They were able to do the job more efficiently, and they have actually appreciated this concept and then the model for that matter. And So I think that answered the first question. The second question is that how it's replicable. To give an example, when I look at from the replicability or the scalability perspective, if a private sector comes into that place, that means the market is mature, right? So when we're talking to initially with the association, and then we also try to do this workshops at different states in India. So when we were talking to them, and the private players were so interested. So for example, the universities, they were also very much interested, and they were thinking that it's an opportunity for them to teach their students who is going to pass out and see how they can actually improve the efficiency. I mean, how they can understand the efficiency of the motor. Plus, they can also see how the remaining is going to help them, to getting more jobs. It's actually polytechnics. They are very much interested, and the association and the project owners and the institutions are actually interested to join hands, and then they wanted to come out with more, rebate centers as to address the MSME problems.
Okay, thank you. But before I move on, this is such an interesting topic to me because I've asked the question, how could this be converted into a MEPS? The rewinding, and I don't know, Mel, if you can weigh in on this now or not, or if anybody else has a thought. I'm just, because I see this as a huge opportunity in Asia since so many of the motors are just flat out rewound. I'm saying instead of, can we have a microphone and give it to Mel right there? Because she's the global MEPS expert with the International Energy Agency, and I know she has some thoughts on this.
Tom, I think the problem is the ability for governments to regulate second-hand markets, and it depends how their laws work. So there are some countries, like New Zealand, where they can do this, but I think that capacity doesn't necessarily easily exist. So if you have a legal framework that allows you to regulate second-hand markets, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a MEPS process. You might have a different level, perhaps. I don't know. You might have a different label, perhaps. But nonetheless, it's all, to me, enforcing it is all about the ability to regulate.
Right. So I think that's the challenge in replication, right? And that's something I would hope you all work on. I think it has a huge potential opportunity. Sorry for diverting your response. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So if you see the best practice in standard labeling program, there are so many of them, but I want to highlight the success story of the air conditioner technologies, especially in a labeling program. It's all actually started in 2006, and if you see the market size of the air conditioner, it's like 2 million. And if you see currently, it's more than 6 million. So you can see the year-on-year, the sales or the requirement of the air conditioner is keep on increasing because of the weather conditions in India. Now, when it comes to the policy level, what we have done, or what interesting thing we have done is that, in case of the room air conditioner, since the beginning we talked only about the fixed speed technology. So then we plan to move on to the inverter air conditioner technology, where we got a big resistance from the manufacturer and the stakeholders because of the cost investment associated with that, and they were not ready to adopt it. So we have played a diplomatic role to make them convince, and the program for the inverter air conditioner got launched in 2015. And if you see the current market for the inverter air conditioner, it's out of total percentage of, if you see the total market right now is like 7 million, and out of 7 million, 30% is market shifted towards the inverter air conditioner. So that is a big achievement for the this program, where we didn't expect that kind of response from the manufacturer initially, the way they were reacted to us. So, this kind of initiatives or the policies that gives really a motivation to think big for the other appliances, for other schemes as well. And additionally, looking at all this success, we are like even planning to launch new appliances like, that is the B, is like chillers, variable refrigerant flows, microwave and washing machine, setup box. So the labeling program for all these appliances has been exploring, and additionally, the 24 new appliances market assessment studies is going on, like which is in the commercial side, industrial side, and the solar side. So this is one of the best practices, or I could say, in labeling. And in terms of the replicability, of course, unfortunately, India is not leading in terms of the labeling program standards and the overall perspective, because Europe and the US, they all are doing very great, even the Japan also. So
Bit emerging markets, okay?
Yeah, yeah. So like in emerging markets in Asia, I would say Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, somewhere they can see our labeling program success, and they could adopt few of the policies. And I think Thailand, Indonesia, I'm not sure about it, but they can see our labeling program in that case. That's it.
Thank you very much. Alex?
Best practices, so what works best? ESCO performance contracting is a very effective way of flowing third-party capital. Using IEA statistics in its energy efficiency market report of 2017, 60% of the global ESCO market now sits in Asia. 60%. That's $16 billion of $25.1 billion global ESCO market estimated by the IEA. So the center of gravity of the global ESCO market sits in this region. And I think that the second best practice is, how do you get private sector and civil society to effectively partner with government? So the one, I won't call it mistake, for lack of a better term, the inefficiency rather, we trusted the executive side of government to champion the cost of energy efficiency for a quarter century too long. So we gave them our ideas, and they championed it before legislature. Why, among the many reasons why the law is finally coming into place, is because we changed that model. We made civil society, private sector, an equal partner of government. And then you drive the pace now. And the executive side of government will follow. So that's the second best practice, which I feel could be easily replicated across most of developing Asia.
Anthony?
Well, I'd love to get into a deeper discussion on the ESCO market because I'm a firm believer, as you say, but my experience here with the customer side is there's a very low level of awareness. So we'll park that. That's a later discussion. But you know, Tom, I was also involved in the Walmart kind of transformation from a Canadian perspective with one of the suppliers to Walmart back in 2006 to maybe 2007. And in the end, the wind sort of came out of Walmart sales, and so everything kind of got softened a little bit. I think it's different. I think this time it's different. When you look at all of the trends, you look at the clean energy, the renewable energy growth, the decrease in costs, Paris, all those macro factors are very different, meaning that I think the commitment of the brands that we're working with is really, it's solid. It's been cemented. And the key suppliers are selling 40 to 90% of their production to one customer. So that's a very significant influence, 40 to 90%. And that's, we're being very selective about who we would work with in that way so that those drivers are there.
As Jerry Maguire says, show me the money.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Best practices, it's very simple, really. It comes down to like management systems. So what's the process for data collection, verification, reporting, and then analysis, so action can be taken. That's one tranche. What is the, the frequency of communication and analysis of that data, and what is the capacity of the staff to actually then take those strategic decisions? Very simple, like that's basic. That's the management system, but above that sits an energy management system and technology, but below that, frankly, I think, which is fundamental, sits mindset. And that's, that's not a best practice that we can look at to develop, but it's a barrier, it's a challenge, and it's something that needs to be addressed. So the simple answer is really that it's like good management systems need to be in place, but above and below, there's these other areas that need to coincide.
No easy answer, or would have been
done,
long time
as you
ago.
said.
Right. Okay, so I'm sorry we're getting near the end. We thought we had plenty of time, but I wanted to really get these, kind of extract out of each of these guys what they thought their best practice was, because we're kind of, the areas that they're in have major impacts globally. So I'm going to open the floor for questions, please. Oh, okay, co-chair writes. Go ahead.
Anthony, I used to work on something called the Industrial Energy Efficiency Best Practice Program. Surprise, surprise. And it was a program that was started in the UK in 1990. And it started being replicated around the world. And I was lucky enough to take the program to China. And one of the things that we constantly came up with are the things that you're talking about. So we had those problems nearly 30 years ago. And I hope that, I want a positive answer to this, that the ability to use cheap sensors, cheap communications technologies, AI, learning about processes, could actually give us a kind of a real paradigm change in industrial energy efficiency. Because industrial energy efficiency is the nut we have to crack, because every process is slightly different. It's not like MEPs, it's not like buildings even, where you can simplify things a lot. So how far away are we from that world?
No, that's great. Absolutely. Sensors are inexpensive. Data is now pervasive. So, and indeed, some of the brands are developing guidelines. So they're not, policy yet or requirements, but guidelines around level of submetering and even type of submetering. So moving from analog to digital data, which of course is there. It's before us, and then will eliminate so much of not only the timeliness, but also the inaccuracy that we're facing around the data challenge. So that is, I would still say a few years away, to be honest, before any kind of real uptake. However, when you mention AI, it's interesting because yesterday I sat in, Charlotte was one of the winners, Equota Energy. And I had a chat with her last night, and one of her solutions is, of course, using AI to drive down and improve performance. So I'm looking forward to learning more. I think there's definitely some opportunity there. One of the things I've been kind of diving into on the side is the use of blockchain in perhaps setting up some kind of exchange amongst brands in a certain market. So that's and the Climate Change Coalition that was referenced yesterday, I'm a part of that as well, a new kind of member, so a student really looking to learn to see can something like that be applied. So digital submeters, I think, are the easiest access, and they're still a few years away, but who knows, maybe something like AI or blockchain might leapfrog and jump ahead to drive solutions.
Okay, Alex wants to jump in quickly.
Yep, a very quick reply. It's what we're doing in the Philippines right now. It's exact opposite. We are donating the smart metering concept to government buildings. So 3 pilot buildings, we're putting smart meters. There's a live dashboard at the Department of Energy, and they can now get real-time readings of cooling, lighting, and other loads. So we're doing that for 3 buildings in the Philippines.
Yeah, just real quick, and I'm asking them not to talk, and here I am talking, sorry. But a major barrier you have in the industrial sector that I have found, and that's where I make my living, is the hesitancy of the owner to provide that information. They deem it confidential, and they protect it a lot for various reasons, one of which in emerging economies are what they report to the government in taxes revenues is much less than what they actually produce. So when they put out this production data energy, it's easy for anybody to extrapolate. So that's another bigger barrier than just the technological potential. All right, another question, please. Yes. Please say who you're with. Yes, tell us who you're with, and try to keep the question brief and very clear.
Very, very clear. I will make it very clear and short. So I'm Jigar from ADB. I am working for Indian Residence Mission. My question is to Anthony. My question is about the supply chain management case which you have present. On the supply chain management case, you said one of the solutions is the solar rooftop. So did you try a model for the suppliers which will work on the RESCO model rather than CAPEX model? So because that's the win-win situation for the supplier. They need not to invest, and it's possible for the main I would say the brand to aggregate. So RESCO will be also interested, and for the supplier also they need not to invest. So that will be a win-win situation for both.
So thank you for I just want to make sure I understand your question. So you're talking about rooftop solar under a developer finance model like a PPA, for example.
Yes, true.
And are you asking what is the appetite on the supplier side, or are we engaging in that space? Can you clarify a little bit, please?
Yeah, so my question is it possible, I mean, did you try that model by offering to the supplier rather than going for capex model. They should
Yes.
go for RESCO model.
Absolutely.
It will be a win-win situation, and the model will definitely work in that case.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And indeed, some of the live conversations, the follow-ups I mentioned, they're exactly centered on that. Now, there are policy challenges in various markets. So, for instance, in Vietnam, where we have one such discussion, you cannot, the only group that can sell electricity is EVN. So we couldn't sell as a private developer. So there, we're looking at more of a solar leasing model. And you want to stay under a certain scale, under 1 megawatt typically. In Cambodia, there's been some changes around solar rooftop policy, and now it's starting to open up a little bit more, and we're having a very good advanced discussion with actually a zone, an industrial zone there on that. So where we would bring, again, all the financing and enter into a long-term PPA. So yes, there's an appetite. There's an education that's needed to explain that there is no CapEx, because they hear it, but they don't believe it sometimes. And then there's a lot of kind of analysis, policy, and technical and financial to follow. But there is indeed a market there for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, and all the best.
And there are several companies doing it. I mean, I have an industrial ESCO, and we're actually now doing what you call SEEP, Solar Energy Efficiency Project, under the shared savings model. But the key is to stay off the grid. Don't do PPAs with the grid.
Oh,
so
yeah,
bottom line is we're just solar now because it's cost effective. It's just another energy savings measure. You know, when we're just displacing what they buy from the grid, and they pay us 70-80% of the savings. So it can be simple, except for we have certain regulatory elements. But if you can keep the supply being done by the owner, you can overcome a lot of those sales. You're not really selling electricity. Anyway, one more question, please. Sorry, we got 2 minutes. None. Then I have one more. Alex. Talk to us a little bit about what these tax incentives are and how do you get to that 2.3 factor. That's very intriguing to me.
Oh yeah. So what we're trying to increase the commercial attractiveness, the commercial viability of third-party capital flows. So without incentives, we're getting sub 6% after-tax IRR. With the tax incentive package that we seek from government, it will be 14.6, almost 15%. And 15% is what most third-party capital providers will look, the upper teens of after-tax. To answer your question, the tax package, the minimum tax package we seek is, number one, duty-free importation of capital equipment. Number two, 6-year income tax holiday. I'm aware that in Thailand they offer 8-year income tax holiday for energy efficiency. And third, zero-rated VAT. Now the third one is a struggle because the Philippine government is trying to raise more taxes for a massive infrastructure program. They're putting more levy on fossil fuel, but unlike most other governments where that levy, like Thailand, went to energy efficiency, no, it goes to the pot, the national treasury, for their infrastructure program. I'd like also to mention that something that I attempted to do in India, reclassify energy efficiency as infrastructure, so that when government programs, budgets, and disburses, it is on the basis of infrastructure program rules.
So just real quick clarification, when you say tax holiday, when I've heard it, it's usually for the whole company, and that's not what you're saying. They end up getting a tax credit, don't they? A tax credit for the investment they make in the equipment, is that correct?
They have a tax credit, that's correct, and they could apply this tax credit for a maximum of 6 years. Based on the ceiling would be 100% of the project cost. Now, where we're still negotiating that with government, they only want the capital equipment cost. What we're saying is project cost, which includes cost of financing, engineering, procurement, commissioning, testing. So the whole works, right, of services plus capital equipment.
It's my understanding you're asking for a tax credit of 30% of that number right now.
30%. Right now they say 30% of capital equipment.
That's what I'm saying. Yep.
What we're saying is 100% of project cost.
I understand. Got it. Good luck with that. Any other questions? So we're at the 12:31. I think I'm quite pleased with the management of time here. So you guys can go to your lunch. I want to please thank our panelists here. I think they did a great job. Really appreciate you coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ma'am?